Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the conversations here, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is IsaacR11, or you can find me on Mastodon. My handle there is IsaacR11 at Fossadon.org. All right, my guest, we've spent tons of time out on the conference circuit. We've talked about all sorts of good topics. We were talking before about random things like Lego and Star Wars and all that sort of stuff. But I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about him in general. So let's just get going. So my guest today is Marc Duiker. Marc, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hey, thanks, Isaac, for inviting me. Hey, everyone. I'm Marc Duiker. I'm a senior developer advocate at Diagrid, a company founded by the co-creators of Dapr open source, Marc and Jeroen Snyder. Been working there for almost a year and a half now. It's really exciting stuff. And yeah, we're looking forward to this podcast.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation too. For one thing, because I'm fascinated about a lot of things about you specifically, like areas that you're interested in tech and some of the side hobbies you have. But I love to start conversations with how we got started. So origin story. So do you remember when technology was the thing for you? Do you remember specifically? Was there a point in time, or was it just gradual?
No, there was definitely a point in time. So I studied chemistry, so
Okay.
I don't have like a traditional IT background. So I studied chemistry, but one of the subjects that we had was had some programming in the basic language, so basic programming. And we had an assignment that we needed to create something, and I already then was like very much inspired by some sort of creative coding. I didn't know the term then yet, but it was like very mathematical and with fractals and stuff. So I got very excited and programmed some like basic fractals using the basic programming language for that subject. So that was my first time actually programming something, and I really enjoyed that. Didn't really touch programming further on, but that became a bit later in my first job, because I had a laboratory job. I was wearing like a white coat and like the safety glasses and stuff like that. I was mostly doing experiments, but part of the experiments was like processing results and then showing results. And one of the challenges there was that they needed to report lots of different X-ray data graphs, and that was all loaded in Excel, and then they created charts from that, but that was all done by hand. But the scale was so big that it was not feasible anymore to do it by hand. So then I started using some JavaScript. So I exported the files in JSON, and then had some kind of a very basic HTML file that used some JavaScript to actually plot all of those data, those X-ray charts in just like a web page. So yeah, it was first like a bit of basic, and then the second language that I actually used for work was JavaScript. So that it was fun times.
I'd imagine when you did that, your colleagues probably thought that you were some sort of wizard, right? Like,
Yes.
like, because I mean, let's be honest, like Excel is the most used programming language of all time, right?
And it's amazing. I mean, I still love the tool. I mean, you can do everything with it.
It's mildly terrifying. Like, especially like if you consult at any point in your career, like the amount of companies that are super dependent on Excel. Like,
every finance institution.
Or it's like you'll come across like somebody and like, oh, we want to take this Excel spreadsheet and turn it into a website, right? Because everybody's done those sort of things. So chemistry, like as somebody who gave up on chemistry, like I took some chemistry courses in university, like, but I gave up at once we hit organic chemistry because it stopped making sense, right? Like,
so that was my specialization.
Yeah. So okay, let's talk about this off on a tangent for a little bit, right? So I didn't get, or I very understood like basic chemistry, like that makes sense to me. But once we started getting to like these more, I guess, complex concepts, it started to fall down very, very quickly for me. Like, what was it about chemistry that interested you? Was it just like a better understanding of how the world worked? Was it something else? Was it just like you were good at it, so you just kind of stuck with it?
there's definitely like always been like an interest in science in general
Sure.
in
Yeah.
my life, and then that started really when I was quite young already. And to be honest, that study was also relatively close by where I live, so it was also
Hmm.
very practical to go
Yeah.
there as well. And I can remember they had one of these open study days where you can just visit the location and check out all the classrooms, and they do some stuff and experiments for you. So it just looked like a lot of fun to me. Yeah? So like
Yeah.
all these test tubes and flasks and
Yeah. Yeah.
doing all these experiments and putting stuff together, and you get like new materials out of it. So yeah, it really fascinated me indeed, and it was definitely a very fun study there. Yeah,
Yeah.
really enjoyed it a lot.
I can relate to the being curious with science thing. Like I've been interested in like different sciences for as long as I can remember. My
Mhm.
kids now are getting to the stage where they're starting to like ask like very basic chemistry questions, like what does
Oh,
H2O mean, or like
oh
what
yeah,
like
yeah,
this
yeah,
sort of things. And I'm going through but they have like a level of interest where
yeah.
I start to nerd out a little bit, and then they're like, I just had one question, like, and you're telling me like, because at one point like I had memorized like the periodic table, like that was I did it by
Whoa,
choice too, which is completely
what?
weird. I have a weird
Okay.
like memorization fetish, I
Oh wow.
guess. Like
Okay.
so like I remember I don't remember any of it now basically, but I remember like quite vividly like a teacher being like, why did you, I'm like, I don't know, maybe it'll be valuable at some point. And I 2 years later I forgot all of it and whatever.
Oh, oh.
It's fine. It is. So like I'm curious, like some of the things that you probably learned, or some of the things that you problems you were trying to solve, like there's probably some pretty good correlation between problems in practical sciences, like chemistry or whatever, and like problem
Hmm.
solving in tech. Like, are there some things that you can think about? Like, obviously, like your example of I needed to chart things and like Excel became
Yeah,
too challenging.
yeah,
But like,
yeah,
from like a
yeah.
problem solving perspective, like as somebody who was actually a practicing, like somebody who worked in real or practical sciences, is the problem solving mechanism pretty similar between trying to solve a problem with chemistry versus trying to solve a problem with tech or computers?
Mm, I'm not sure. It's. I think it is really quite different, because usually you start with some kind of a hypothesis that you need
Mm-hmm.
to prove it's true or not true. um and yeah, I'm not sure how well that translates into like, hey, I'm writing a program versus, well,
Yeah,
maybe the requirements of the program are maybe
sure.
then similar to the hypothesis or something. But what is definitely true is, both share a lot of experimentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are so many different ways you can program something in, the many programming languages there are. But also the experiments that I did also required lots of different iterations and lots of refinements. So yeah, things were never right the first time, right? Because
Sure.
that's very unlikely, especially when you're dealing with organic chemistry. Usually you have some kind of recipe, so you usually have a starting point.
Yeah.
But the line of work that we did, required us to, try a lot of different combinations of different ingredients, and then sort of predicted the outcome and see if it was true. So yeah, it definitely required lot of iterations, and then yeah, that same approach, is also very much present in doing IT and programming work. It's probably you're never done probably on the first iteration. You always need some
Sure.
more refinement, more tests. Some stuff is breaking. You need more refinement, and so those are the parallels that I see there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've done this rant a few times, like this idea of like writing software and like writing programs and all of that. Like there's a lot of creativity and art to it, right?
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
of like computer science or like solving like things with code or what you ever want to call it. It sits kind of
Yeah.
in between like very practical hard sciences where there are very much like everything is rules oriented and constraint oriented, and then
Right. Yeah.
like the complete like creativity of like artistic
Hmm.
things like playing music or writing, right? Because you need
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need some sense
Yeah.
of reality, but you also
Yes.
need to be able to think outside the box a little bit. And I'm curious to know, like,
Agreed.
do you like, and this is, I just thought about this, so this is completely random. Is it fair to actually call it computer science when it's not like a very practical
Computer
science?
arts, maybe.
Yeah. Well, no, computer
Yeah.
art. Well, we'll talk about computer art in a second, Mark. That's a
Yeah,
great
exactly.
segue,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm curious,
Yeah,
like,
but no, I think it's a good, yeah, it's a good call indeed, because is it really like a hard science? Yeah, probably not always. And maybe when you write a new programming language, or when
sure.
you write a compiler, then it's
Yeah.
probably more like a hard science. But if you're writing software,
Yeah.
software is always for people or for a certain business value, and that is, yeah, that is definitely not a hard science. So
Yeah. I also think about
yeah,
like there. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about sciences in general is you have two paths to go down. You can go down like the academic path, where
mm,
you're trying to do interesting things, like computer science. You're talking about like writing, like creating languages, working with compilers, like cryptography, these sort of things. And then there's this
yeah,
like I'm going to like write software to make another person or set of people lots of money, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
like, I think sciences have that, all sciences kind of have that similar theme where you go into academia or you go into the private
mm-hmm,
sector. Um,
yeah,
but it's quite funny that you talk to a lot of people and they're software developers, but they don't have computer science degrees.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
because,
Yeah,
maybe they come from another science like you. I have like an information systems degree, which is like business plus computers,
right.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a bit of
So
a
it's
mix. Yeah,
interesting that like you talk to a lot, and there's a whole slew of people that didn't even go to university, right? So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I don't know if there's very many fields out there like in the, I guess, science world. Like you can't go and get a job as a chemist without a chemistry degree, right? I mean,
Exactly.
you
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
could, but it would be
Yeah.
very challenging.
Yeah, it's probably quite hard on it. Yeah, it's relatively easy in IT in it. Yeah, which is interesting, right? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
to kind of go back on your path of discovering tech, right? So like you realize that technology can solve problems for you in your domain. When did you realize that at some point you probably figured out like I actually enjoy like the computer stuff more than the beakers and the
Yes,
burners
exactly.
and all of that. When did that happen for you?
Yeah, I think I was like a couple of years in my first job, doing chemistry. It was like a laboratory in Amsterdam. It was really cool place, by the way, because it was like a chemistry startup. So it
Mm,
was like a brand new business, and they
okay.
hired lots of smart brains from all over the world. And me, I was not one of the smart brains. I
The
was just
plan was to
hands.
make you a smart brain. The plan.
Maybe no, I was just doing the execution there, but it was a
Sure.
lot of fun to work with all kinds of people who had like PhDs in chemistry and stuff. So that was really like a very international setting. So that's what I really loved about the job. But yeah, I was a couple of years in there, I think maybe 3 or 4 years, and yeah, I was doing lots of like small automation things on the side there to just make the laboratory work and also the
Mhm.
reporting a bit easier. And so then I talked to my manager there. Okay, I really would like to move more into the IT part and then less
Yeah.
into the chemistry part. So that really like took literally some years, because at first they didn't really have like a good role or position available,
Sure.
or they could miss me doing also the other operational part. So for a couple of years, I did both the laboratory work, but also some laboratory automation,
Mhm.
also with a lot of Excel work, like a lot of
Sure.
VBA macros and stuff like
Oh
that.
man.
And oh my god,
Again, the original programming
did
language, right? VBA.
I did like a lot of horrible stuff
Yeah.
there
I
when looking back to it.
I I've not seen, and look, it's if you want to send me like some really well architected, well designed like VB scripts or VB macros, I would love to see them
Mhm.
because I've never seen it. I've seen just absolute garbage because most of the people that are building those things, they don't have, I guess, like a typical like technology background, like you were talking, right? Like it's just
Yeah, exactly.
like
Yeah,
they find out like, oh, I can manipulate this stuff like more than just changing the formulas or changing the cell values,
yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah.
that's when things start to get troubling. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, more
so
like the citizen developer background in it. Yeah,
yeah,
which I
like
definitely do more.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is funny because I think like, a few years ago now, like we talked about the citizen developer or like non-tech developer. And it's like those folks
Mhm.
have been around forever. Like now you're just giving them
Yeah,
like
yeah,
even
yeah.
more tools to be successful, which I
Oh
think is
yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah. Yes,
What I find is
definitely.
interesting is like trying to market those sort of tools to like real or actual developers. Like if I'm
Right.
a
Yeah.
developer who's like, writing in Python or writing in JavaScript,
Mhm.
like do I want to
Mhm.
have all of my stuff be UI based development? Because I did that. Like one of my first jobs was like using a programming tool called Web Methods, which is like drag and drop
Okay.
blocks sort of thing, like to write
Okay.
code.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I don't even know why I hated it. I just had some like visceral reaction to this is
Oh,
not
interesting.
what I
Yeah.
did in school, and this is not what I enjoyed at school. This is
Right.
like
Yeah.
moving blocks around, but super powerful because you could, like, you didn't have to worry
It's very
about
approachable.
yeah, you
Yeah.
didn't have to worry
Yeah.
about like, like syntax errors or a compiler not working or whatever, right? Like, you could just
White space issues in your Python scripts.
Ex-
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
yeah, like the YAML not being formatted correctly or whatever, right? You don't have to worry about any of that. Um, okay, so you're kind of doing both jobs, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm guessing like in your spare time, you're trying to like learn like how to build things in JavaScript or how to, build web pages and all of that. Like, what was the turning point when you realized like, okay, like I want to actually try and make a real career as a developer?
Yeah, so I was need messing around with lots of Excel and VBA and
Yeah.
some Access databases need on the job. But there was like a very tiny IT department there who actually created software. It was just like two people, and I really had like a goal for, hey, I want to be part of that team. Right? I want to like
Hmm.
fully indeed join the IT department there and also help create software. They really supported me with that, so I could like follow lots of courses and do certifications and stuff like that. So yeah, and then they were using .NET, the very first .NET 1.0 back then. So I definitely studied some very early .NET and ASP.NET and stuff like
Yeah,
that. So yeah, I was actually lucky that they supported me with that, so I could
that's
do
great.
even some studying during the job. So that was very very good.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when did you start to? Because for folks who don't know Mark, like Mark now like loves talking about like if you want to think about like programming, like there's different levels of abstraction, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
you in my and correct me if I'm wrong, but you like to talk about like the very like in my opinion one of the most abstracted ways to build applications, right? Like event driven stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
when did you realize like that, writing code, writing websites is fun, but like the idea of like building very small routines or small pieces of functionality around something happening. Like when did you realize like that was something you were interested in?
Yeah, that came really quite a bit later.
Sure. Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think with the introduction of Azure Functions,
Yep.
so I was using Azure for a bit for like just just the storage and then the
Mhm.
very basic website stuff or the web server hosting. But then Azure Functions was introduced and I was immediately interested and hooked by it. Even oh wow, you can just have this very small piece of code. I mean, it's like super accessible. Well, the early version you had to actually type the code into the Azure
Oh
portal,
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which was actually quite horrible. But I was really compelled with the idea that you could just push some just a couple lines of code out there and have something like that you could just like call and do stuff for you. So yeah, that was the moment that I thought, oh yeah, this is like super powerful and flexible, and yeah, you
Mhm.
can use this to build, and yeah, you can use it for both for very small systems, but you can also build much bigger systems out of this when you combine it with all kinds of different resources. So yeah, that really got me hooked for and I'm still hooked for when it comes
Yeah,
to this.
yeah.
So not only serverless, but also definitely event-driven systems in general. Yeah,
Yeah, like you mentioned Azure, right? Or like cloud-based computing. Like and I
yeah,
remember and I imagine you have a similar story where I was working for a company and like it was basically asked of me like, "Hey, you're somebody that like likes to tinker around and figure things out. Like, can you like figure out Azure or figure out this cloud thing? Because we need somebody to do it."
yeah, yeah.
And I remember like going to the Azure portal at this time. It was not the blue that we see. It was a much lighter blue, lots more white. Um, and I just remember like being fascinated like all of these things like oh like you can have cloud services where you can have like a VM running but you can also have like this weird thing like worker web thing running like at the same time and you can remote into the VMs. I just thought it was so fascinating. Like and I
Yeah,
was hooked almost
definitely.
immediately. Were you very similar? Where like you saw the cloud and you're like, yeah, like this is cool. Like let's
Yeah,
like
indeed. Yeah, 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 yeah. Because I never really had to do a lot of with like the physical data centers, right? So that was really
Sure.
far away from me,
Yeah.
that world. So I was really like developing some ASP.NET web pages and stuff like that. And I also did a bit with like content management systems. So definitely like backend development, but definitely very close to the web server part, but never really had to do anything with hosting part. So yeah, as soon as you see but the cloud and how accessible that is, that's definitely like it felt like a whole new world that opened to me. So
Yeah.
also a lot of things that I had like zero knowledge about, and for some things I still found difficult. For instance, like the whole networking part, I still find still find difficult. But
Those
yeah, it's
people,
really amazing. Yeah.
yeah, like look, it there are developers, and then there are developers who know networking stuff, and
Yeah.
those are two completely
Yeah.
different breeds of human being. Like,
Yeah, I think I
I've
agree.
I've
Yeah.
been given like at times like, oh, we need you to like look at these logs or look at this traffic or whatever, and I immediately get so confused because it's not my domain, right? Like, I
Hmm.
don't have
Hmm.
a background in like systems administration, and
Yeah.
I don't know how to look
Yeah.
at that sort of stuff and gather anything value. And I remember just like having to like Google search like all the messages, like all the word, like all the logs, like just Google like what does this mean? What does this mean? What does it mean? Well,
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah.
now I
Yeah.
have like Copilot or ChatGPT tell me what it
Yeah.
is. But
Exactly.
like
Yeah. Indeed.
I
Yeah.
just remember like realizing very very quickly that the cloud is, like you said, very easily accessible. It's very like you can go there, you can spin up a web app or whatever and do these things, but very very quickly you can fall off a cliff, and like you just keep falling forever, right?
Yes.
And I feel like
Yeah.
now we're getting to this point
Yeah.
where a lot of the services and think problems that we're trying to solve, they're no longer very simple. They get very
True.
complicated very quickly.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
as you're going through like you learn the cloud, and when did you realize quite quickly like there's a lot of power here, but also you can get in trouble very very fast?
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I think I did a lot of IT consulting in the Azure consulting indeed.
Sure.
So for a lot of companies that moved into the cloud. So the
Hmm.
cloud was like completely new to them. Um, but yeah, what's often the question of how do the costs look like, right? So if you have this workload, what will I be paying each every month, right? So that was quite a big question that a lot of companies had, especially when you go to, for instance, like serverless or event driven.
Hmm.
So yeah, I first had this like a web server always up and running, and I paid it up front, so I knew what the cost was. But yeah, it's a completely different mindset actually when you start using the cloud and actually move your workload from from like a VM in the cloud, which it usually was because there was probably some lift and shift done first,
Yep.
to like a proper event-driven system, and where you have to look at what's the volume of messages going back and forth, and where is it stored, and how much is it accessed. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff that you need to figure out, and also lots of experimentations and proof of
Yeah.
concepts need to be done to get like a good feeling of what's the number for this, like both performance wise and cost wise as well.
Yeah, like you mentioned the lift and shift and then eventually getting to like more modern things. It's funny that
Yeah.
you don't see a lot of like and probably because it's so challenging, like going from that like, oh, I'm just going to take my VMs and I'm going to put them in the cloud and do this thing. And then I'm going to slowly turn this thing into, I guess, a more modern system, right? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I remember I've talked about this with a lot of people. It's like what we really need is like a story of a company. Like that needs to be documented in some way because I think it'd be a really good reference architecture or whatever you want to call it to,
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
oh, I'm a company. Maybe I have some .NET apps or maybe I have some whatever apps in their ASP.NET 4, and we put them in a VM and then they put them in Azure, and then we slowly but surely turn them into
Yeah.
cloud
Yeah.
native running
Yeah.
on Kubernetes with whatever, right? Like,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
like I remember I tried to like scope out the amount of work it would take to build like build content like that, and
Right.
I decided
Yeah.
and I realized very quickly why nobody had done it.
Yeah. You take like a workshop for like a couple of months probably. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 and that's kind of one of my big like I've had this rant a few times about like how we teach technology concepts to people. We give them the hello world, or
Yes.
we give
Yeah.
them the application that would have taken probably 3 years for a company to build.
Yeah.
Right.
Indeed.
And
Yeah.
like this,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
process in the middle, we just kind of wave our hands at. Like or like the very specific scenarios to get from one place to another. Because I think, quite frankly, like it depends on everybody's business, right? But also,
Yeah,
like
there's not a single. Yeah, indeed, I agree. There's too
there's
much
lots of
variation,
pain.
too many options. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so like you're kind of, you're navigating the cloud, and you found kind of event driven stuff. Like when, I don't remember the exact time frame, so people correct me or whatever. But like, we start talking about the phrase cloud native a lot,
Mm,
right? We
mm,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
we'd already start like event driven. Like that idea has been around for a long time,
yeah,
and like to an
yeah,
extent, like you can equate some parts of microservice architecture with event driven architecture, right? Because they
yeah,
work in
yeah, yeah,
similar ways and they solve similar problems sometimes.
yeah,
But then we get to
yeah.
this point where like Kubernetes shows up.
Hmm, hmm.
Like, do you remember like the first time you ever had to work with Kubernetes?
Well, the first time I really had to work with it is I think still quite recent. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
that's maybe like 3 years ago or something.
Okay.
And I just read that Kubernetes turns 10 years old
Yeah.
this year.
I saw
So
that,
it's
and
been
I
around for
don't
10
I don't
years.
I don't
Oof,
remember.
wow.
Yeah, I don't remember Kubernetes being
But
around 10 years ago. But maybe I
no,
wasn't
no, no,
paying
no. So
attention. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
No, so I definitely I've seen it that is being used at some of the companies I did some Azure consultancy for. But also there I usually wasn't the person. So it's usually they either had like a platform team who dealt with that. So I
Sure.
interacted with the platform team. So I didn't need to do anything myself using Kubernetes myself, which is probably a good thing because yeah. I still think it's like a massively complicated
Yeah.
beast. So it's good that it has like special people who can take care of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it actually amazed me that it's already out there for 10 years. I had no idea.
I didn't believe you, so I had to look while you were talking. It's like yeah, so it came out like in
Yeah,
like it was like initially like the first release of it was like announced in like June like 2014, so 10 years ago. And like 1.0 was a year later, so June 2015. So like
yeah,
I, again,
amazing.
I thought that I was kind of like current in tech 10 years ago, right? Working and doing these things, but
No,
I
I
guess I
definitely
was.
not
I guess I
Kubernetes
was
for a
not.
while.
I guess I
Yeah,
was not
yeah,
not paying attention that much. Like I remember, like 10 years ago, like people were still trying to figure out DevOps. People are. I mean, to this day,
yeah,
people are
yeah,
still trying to
exactly.
figure out
Yeah,
DevOps. But
well,
like,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
10 years
indeed. Yeah,
ago, like
yeah,
I think the concept was becoming more and more, I guess, kind of defined as like industry standard because we had systems,
right, right,
but like there
right.
wasn't
Yeah,
any
yeah.
like I guess proper structure
Not a
around things.
common way to handle these things. No,
Yeah.
that's definitely true. Yeah, yeah, and then that's where it definitely made some very big steps. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think for me, I was definitely much focused on the whole serverless part
Yeah.
for quite some years indeed. Yeah, so I never looked that close to
Yeah.
Kubernetes until like a couple of years ago.
And I think I'm similar in that vein. Like I got very interested in Azure Functions almost immediately, right? Like I saw like a build session or whatever when it was first announced, and I was like, oh,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I don't know if you were this kind of developer, but I've always been this kind of developer where I have like 1,000 console apps that do random
Mm-hmm.
things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like the console app
Yeah,
always starts
yeah.
with like while something, and then like just
Oh,
wait, and
right.
like it's
Yeah,
always
yeah,
it's like it's pulling stuff or it's like waiting
yeah,
for like,
yeah,
and when I saw
yeah.
functions, I'm like, oh, console apps in the cloud, like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, indeed. Yeah,
and
yeah,
that
yeah.
like there was a point in time, I'm still very guilty of this too, where I just build apps to build apps. But like, I had like an MSDN subscription, like I had some free Azure credits, and I had so many
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
random things like
Yeah, well, it's great. It's great to learn, right? These
yeah.
things, even if it doesn't really have like a value. Maybe the end product is not the value, but the process is, I think, the value, right?
I mean,
So
I think I
yeah,
had value. Like there were like I used to do some very unsavory things, I guess people would call them. Like I used to do a lot of web scraping, and then I would have Azure Functions do
yeah,
web scraping. So like I would like web scrape for
yeah.
like announcements of things. So I would try to get things
Mm-hmm.
like almost immediately. I had this whole system, and this is completely wild. Like I would get an email or a text message whenever like a website like made something available to buy.
Oh,
Like, and I
right.
was like,
Yeah, yeah,
so I would do that, and I got some cool stuff because of that. And I just remember like very quick, like this is technology solving a problem immediately for me,
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
like
definitely. Yeah.
we're all, I think we've all done this as developers where we just have like, you know, I can do this 20 times or I can write an app to do it forever. And
Yeah,
like, and
yeah.
for what it's worth, like Azure Functions, like the pricing model is insanity, like to me. Like it's, I'll never understand. I've talked to people on that team and all that, I know how it's so cheap. I know like how it's like they're able to accomplish that. But in my brain, I'm like, I can run something like a million times and it doesn't cost any
Yeah.
money. Like, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
like
Yeah,
whatever.
that's pretty amazing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's
Uh,
true. Yeah.
so so you got interested in event driven stuff. Do you remember like the first real like event driven project you had to work on?
Oh, phew. Um, I don't think it was the first I worked on, but I worked for like a couple of big ones for some financial organizations
Mm-hmm.
here in the Netherlands. So one had to do with like transaction processing, and then like yeah, passing the transaction to like a third party service who did some kind of fraud detection to
Sure.
it. So that it was yeah, some reasonably big high volume things that are happening. That's very interesting. Um, and then also some more like yeah back end related processing where had where time wasn't really that much of an issue. So that was actually quite the complete opposite, because for
Yeah.
the transaction part it was really important. It was like very
Sure.
speedy
It
and
needs to
quick.
be real time. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But for the other part, it was like a customer wants like some kind of a report generated of all of their financial stuff, and they would receive it via the email, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
didn't matter if that happened like within seconds or minutes.
Yeah.
So, but both were like completely like event driven and completely async, which is really cool to build, yeah. But also sometimes tricky to explain that to yeah, often people in the business, right? Because we're not creating a report like on the fly that you can immediately download, but it's async. It might take some time. We need to collect data from different data sources, so we don't know exactly when it's ready. But then they will receive a link where they can download it.
Yeah.
So it also has its challenges when when just the way of working of the whole user experience is actually different
Mm-hmm.
than before.
Yeah. Like I think of back a long time ago, like there'd be a website and the website has a button on it. And that
Yeah,
button you just
yeah,
click and then the person
yeah.
would wait. Like that whole idea to me like is so wild that people were just okay
Yeah,
with clicking a button and
yeah.
like don't close the page, don't go away
Yeah,
from the
exactly.
page,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you click the button
yeah,
and you wait like 5 minutes or whatever,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's pretty wild to me. So like we talked about event driven and we talked to an extent like this like microservice architecture, and now like the stuff that you work on is like in this world of like distributed application, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
what is it about distributed application or like building apps that have to live everywhere, have to do all these weird things? Like what is it about that interests you so much?
Um, Yeah, I mean, so the what interests me is definitely the complexity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Although I definitely don't fully grasp it to like the very raw level again when it
No one
lands on
does.
Kubernetes, for instance, right? So that's like I still have a lot of learning to do there, but it definitely intrigues me that there are like these amazing projects out there that help to make it building these types of applications much easier. So yeah, I'm really focused on what kind of developer toolings are out there that can help developers make their lives easier.
Yeah.
So I find that really compelling. So yeah, I'm very fortunate to have landed with Dapr, which is like a great fit for me. But yeah, there are like not a lot of similar tools out there, but tools that does something in the similar space.
Mm-hmm.
Really interests me a lot. And the same goes for like workflows, right? Because I was a big fan of like, for instance, Azure Functions with
Mm-hmm.
Dribble functions, also the
Yeah.
workflows, and now Dapr also has workflows. So yeah, that's I found these things like super interesting. It becomes much easier for developers to build these reliable systems, and by just using the code that they already know, right? But just providing them some extra APIs. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really fascinating.
So I'm just gonna call you like you use the word developer. a few
Yeah.
times, like as you were talking, right? And I think, as somebody who's been a developer or likes to play a developer on TV, like, um, we talked about a lot of complexity that technology has kind of evolved into over the last 10 to 15 years, right? And a lot of the things, in my opinion, are things that are far outside of the level of interest and skill set of most developers, right? And,
Yeah, true.
you know,
Yeah.
uh, you mentioned Dapr specifically, right? So, maybe can you give just like 30 seconds on like what Dapr is
Yeah.
and what the problem solve is?
Yeah, the elevator pitch for Dapr, right.
Sure.
So if you want to build distributed applications, regardless of the language or where exactly they run, then yeah, Dapr is a really cool project to use. So Dapr offers you a lot of APIs, also known as building blocks. So if you need to interact with state, or if you need to interact with message brokers or secret stores or configuration stores, or if you want to build workflows, then Dapr offers these APIs. And the nice thing of Dapr is it runs in a separate process next to your application. So it runs in a sidecar architecture. And so all of the communication that goes on between your applications in your distributed application, yeah, so the landscape goes through the Dapr sidecars. So that's actually ensures that you can have like a very a reliable and secure communication between your services, because that all is passed through the Dapr sidecar, which is designed to be like a very performant and very
Mhm.
reliable, secure communication. It does like automatic retries if things fail, for instance. So yeah, Dapr provides a lot of like standard stuff for you already that you don't have to worry about, right? So it's already secure. It's already reliable. So it actually saves you a lot of time when building stuff.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah, I'm a
so
big fan.
I'm gonna paraphrase a bit of that. So like
Yeah,
I'm a developer. There are all these things that I probably don't want to build as a developer. One, because I don't
yeah,
know how to build them, or two, time is a thing. So
yeah,
I can like leverage this thing, this Dapper thing, and I get all the things that you were just talking about. It doesn't decrease the performance of my app because it runs in a separate process. It gives me all this like out of the box functionality. Um, and like that sounds great. And also like you kind of buried the lead. It's free.
yeah. True.
You like
Yeah,
so
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like it's a for folks that might not know, it's an open source project. It's sponsored by the CNCF organization, which kind of like it's a body that kind of manages and kind of procures the life of open source projects in like the cloud native world. Cloud native being what we've been talking about: distributed architectures, microservice architectures, event driven stuff. Like kind of all that follows into this cloud native umbrella of tech.
Yeah.
And Dapr is one of those things, created by some folks at Microsoft. And then it was kind of handed off to the CNCF to steward it. And then the folks who built Dapr, they realized like there's still complexity here.
Yeah,
So
indeed.
right,
Yeah,
so they started a
yeah, indeed.
company. And do you want to tell me
Yeah.
about that company?
Yeah, so the company is Diagrid, and indeed, right? So developing with Dapr is, let's say, yeah, relatively easy. Although there can also be some complexity. For instance, when you want to debug stuff, that can definitely be improved. But we have running and maintaining Dapr, because Dapr is usually run on top of Kubernetes. So there's always the Kubernetes complexity that comes with it. But you have like a Dapr control plane that you install, and that also gathers a lot of metrics. And yeah, as like a platform engineer or developer, if you have responsibility of that, yeah, you need to be in the know of what's going on there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you need to have like a proper monitoring in place, because yeah, Dapr already gives you a lot of monitoring. It integrates with OpenTelemetry. But you do need some kind of a way, or a tool to properly manage your Dapr cluster, and that runs on Kubernetes. So that's why one of the products that Diagrid has built
Mm-hmm.
is called a Conductor. So that takes care of a lot of the monitoring and operational parts of running and maintaining Dapr. So, for instance, you can very easily upgrade Dapr, like just with a click of a button, and you can also downgrade again if you want. So you don't have to like go for each pod and upgrade Dapr there, or write your own scripts to upgrade it. So that's all done for you. there's a lot of advisories also in Conductor that because Conductor will actually scan all of your configuration files that you use for Dapr, and configuration files are usually used for security settings or for how you actually maybe change the default behavior of your resiliency policies that you have. So since the Conductor is inspecting all of those and will give you recommendations of, oh, hey, you've used a clear password in here, so that's not production ready. Please use one of our VSCode stores that is supported by Dapr. So yeah, it really helps you in like a very smooth operational features
Is
to
it
also save you some time there.
Yeah, is it safe to say that like, so Diagrid provides services and products on top of Dapr to harden the Dapr experience and make it, I guess, more enterprise ready, make it more scalable, make it more resilient, all those
Yeah,
things, right?
exactly.
So it's like
Yeah,
a
exactly.
plus one on top
Yeah.
of Dapr, right?
Exactly. Yeah, indeed. And you can of course still do all these things yourself, but yeah, it will cost you
Sure,
more
but why
time
would
and
I
more
if it
effort.
already exists
And
somewhere
yeah,
else, right? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's why you have this tool. Yeah. And since a couple of months, there's also actually like a free version available that supports just one cluster. I mean,
Okay.
the enterprise version you can use with many clusters as possible. But there's also like a free edition that you can just either use like a local Kubernetes cluster, like a Minikube or Kind, or just connect to one cluster in the cloud.
Excellent.
So yeah, no, it's really very valuable tool. Yeah, and some customers even mentioned that they actually save some money by using the tool because it also inspects, for instance, what kind of VM sizes you're using.
Yeah.
So they could actually downsize some of their VMs based on the information they got from Conductor. So
I mean, that's
sounds
that's
pretty cool.
awesome. Like the idea that, again, as a developer who doesn't want to do a lot of things, I want to like write code to solve some business problem more than likely.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I
Yeah,
don't have to worry about this stuff, right? So maybe I'll use Dapr. And then I realized like, yeah, Dapr's great, but there's still like some complexities that I also need to manage and worry about. So like
yeah,
Diagrid can provide some services to like sit on top of that and make my life even easier as a developer. And especially like you said, there's a free option if I'm just playing around with it. And then, if my needs scale, like there's options there too.
exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm like I like this space because I think one of the things that we see a lot in open source is you see an open source project, and then you see companies built around that project to provide kind of additional plus one services, right?
yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah,
and I think that's great for a lot of reasons. One, like there's a community. It means if there's enough people to build a company, that means that there's a community there of people that want those sort of things. Like people just don't start up companies without a good reason to. So
no,
it
indeed.
means
Yeah,
that the
yeah, yeah.
ecosystem is thriving. It means the community is asking for these things. And I'm
Yeah,
curious to
well,
know.
it means the need the user base is big
Yeah,
enough, right? So
yeah,
there is an actual need, it also usually means that the community is also big enough to help contribute to the open source
yeah,
project as well, right? So there
yeah,
is like, yeah, not necessarily the same community between
yeah,
like users and contributors, but yeah, definitely like a strong interaction between those two as well.
yeah. And I think that's like the pure like beauty of open source when you have like this ecosystem of, like you said, users, maintainers, contributors, and they're all
Yeah.
working in some way because like I said, tech is getting really hard, right?
Oh yeah,
Especially
definitely.
like,
Yeah.
every company needs to build something that's insane, right? And if, I remember
Yeah.
like I was talking to a friend of mine years ago, and he was talking about how when this is like right when Kubernetes like first started getting like really, really popular. And he
Hmm.
said, quite frankly, like we kind of built a Kubernetes at a company I worked at.
Well,
Like,
yeah,
and I'm like,
yeah,
yeah, like
yeah.
I've heard stories of like folks
That
needing
happens
to,
so often.
yeah, like
Yeah.
needing to, like not all of Kubernetes because Kubernetes covers like a huge
No,
range
no,
of
no,
things,
no,
but like,
no. There's a lot of
may,
self-built
yeah,
stuff.
the
Yeah,
service discovery
yeah,
stuff, or maybe like the secret management stuff, or the auto scaling stuff, or all of these things, right? Like, and
yeah,
these tools now exist, but with these tools, like it just comes more and more complex to just build an app. So like people will come into the industry and they'll be like,
yeah.
okay, do I need Kubernetes to build a web app? It's like the answer is no, but they don't know, right?
Yeah, exactly. No,
Um,
indeed. Yeah, indeed.
so like
Yeah,
here,
yeah. It's
so
definitely a challenge these days.
so like a
Yeah.
question for you is like, maybe I've built an app, and it's not just an app, it's not a single app. Maybe it's a set of APIs and there's a web front end and stuff like that, right?
Hmm, hmm.
And I need to get to the point where I'm getting lots and lots of users, right? Like when does when do I need to make the decision for Kubernetes? When do I need the decision from Kubernetes to then use Dapr? When do I need to
Mm,
from Dapr and then finally to using Diagrid? I would love to hear that.
right.
And you can
Um,
and if like that becomes far too complicated of a decision tree, like that's fair too. I'm just genuinely curious because like I see these things almost as like they all come at once. If you think you need Kubernetes, you probably need Dapr, and if you need Dapr, like to an extent, you probably need some form of Diagrid services and products, right?
yeah, there's definitely some hints I can give you.
Yeah.
Not a complete picture because I'm not sure if that's even possible, but I'll definitely give some hints. So um, what I see regarding organizations that use Dapr. So the organizations are either like super big enterprises that have
Mm-hmm.
a lots of development teams and they go full in this distributed application development and microservices. So that's why they have different development teams building their own stuff and they need to integrate with each other. And then Dapr is useful because maybe one team is using Python because they do machine learning and another team is using Java, another team is using .NET. But since Dapr is like language agnostic, it can all communicate with each other. So yeah, but then you're already like super big. But there's also the other side when you're like a startup and you have like 0 lines of code. Uh, uh, Already then it's actually very useful to start using Dapr because it gives you all of these API abstractions over like
Yeah.
sub messaging and over state management. Because if you start, especially in like a greenfield project, maybe you don't even know where your workload is going to end.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Azure, maybe TCP, maybe it's AWS, maybe it's on premise. No idea. But with Dapr, it doesn't really matter because hey, you have like components for all of these major cloud providers or open source components that you can run just on your own hardware. So you can actually like delay a lot of decisions when you start a greenfield application or yeah, distributed system when you start using Dapr already. So yeah, a lot of people don't really think about that. They think
Yeah.
you need to have, okay, when I need to use Dapr, then I need to have like massive scale stuff and
Sure.
and stuff like that. But you can already start like very small, and maybe you just use one API, right? Maybe you just have one app. Maybe you don't have a distributed app yet, but maybe you just use it for like some configuration management or some secrets that you want to read from a key value store or like a secret store, and that's it. Right, so you don't even if you use Dapr, you don't have to use all of its APIs because
Mm-hmm.
I think there are now like 10 or 11 APIs. You can just use one API, but yeah, at least if you start with Dapr, yeah, you can like postpone a lot of decisions. And what kind of message broker will I use? Well, it doesn't matter because I'm
Yeah.
using Dapr, right? So yeah, it actually you can actually focus on it on really the business side of things and the business code and the logic that you want to write. And when it comes to integrations, you can always switch integrations later on. So that's actually a valuable thing, and it doesn't really matter if size, because of course you can start with like a very regarding message brokers, and you can start with maybe like a RabbitMQ that you just host yourself, because you still have like a VM in your attic, fine. And but when you need to reach
Yeah.
a certain number of users, okay, maybe you now want to go to the cloud, okay, well then you switch like
Yeah.
for like an Azure message broker. Or maybe when you reach into like the billions of users, oh, maybe the cloud becomes like too expensive. I need to buy my own hardware and go back to on-premise. Well,
Yeah.
then you can still do that with Dapr.
Yeah, the building block approach, like I love the fact that you called that out because we talk about it all the time. It's like, do I really need to build this thing, right? Do I need to build configuration management, state management, service discovery, whatever, right? Like, no, probably
Hmm.
not. I just need a
Yeah,
provider, and then
yeah,
I just use some code that's been trusted by lots and lots of other folks, and just use that. Like, and then if I need to change that
yeah,
provider at any
exactly,
point, like I don't have to rewrite everything, which I think
exactly. Yeah,
there's tons of value,
yeah.
especially if you're small, like you were saying. Um, this is great. Like I'm glad that we've had an opportunity to chat about like this. This has been awesome. I want to make a hard segue because I wanted to talk about this right when we got started, but I wanted to learn a little bit more about kind of how like the chemistry stuff. Um,
Sure.
like the we talk about you know people in tech being like somewhat analytical or thinking about the one side of their brain, and and then we kind of talked a little bit about the artistic stuff, and like I wanted to bring this up because like you are an artist, right? Like you like but it's not the way that you would typically think as an artist. Like you want to talk a little bit about like what you do with tech and how is it you're able to kind of
Yeah,
get that creative outlet and how folks can kind of
yeah,
check it
yeah,
out?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, there are actually a couple of things that I like really in the art world. Had the one that's closest to programming and software development called creative coding, and then you write code to either create music or you create visuals with code. So I've been doing this for like a couple of years now. So there's some examples on my website. Yeah, that really I get so much joy when I do such a thing. So each January, there's like an online event called January with a G. Yeah? So because
Mm,
it's also called generative art because usually
okay.
you write some lines of code which then creates something for you. So it's not generative art like in generative AI, but you write in this case I use P5.js, which is based on processing. And so I write some JavaScript code, and that will then create some visuals for me. So I'm always very happy when it's January and I can join this generative
Yeah.
month to yeah, create a new small piece of yeah, generative art each day, because each day you get like a new piece of text that gives you
Mm.
some inspiration. Okay, please create something around this theme. So that's a lot of fun. Yeah, and it's also like, yeah, almost like limitless in its possibilities. So yeah, that's really inspires me a lot.
How did you get started? Because I mean, like, I've loved your pixel art for and I like the thought of taking technology and making it fun, right? Like you talk to
Yeah,
kids, and
yeah.
like most kids or most people that are like young, like if they
Mm-hmm,
want to get
mm-hmm.
into tech, like they want to build video games, right? Or they want
Yeah,
to like they want to do something fun
yeah,
with
yeah,
technology, right? And then you
yeah.
find out that like building like actual video games is not a fun job, but like that's a different conversation for a different day. But like,
Yeah, yeah.
what is it about like doing like in like I'm trying to phrase this the right way. What when you take like an idea and
Mm-hmm.
it's you're using your creative energy and you're getting some fun out of it. Like what is it about that that like really like invigorates you? Like you're talking about like the generative AI stuff, right? Like what is it about that that you find so interesting?
Yeah, with this month of January, right? That you
Yeah.
get a new prompt or a new piece of text every day, and yeah, you need to, yeah, create some stuff about it. What I like about that is you get like a reference to maybe like an existing artist, and you create
Mm.
art in their style. So you also learn something about maybe
Yeah.
art in general in a completely different field. So that's nice. But the next thing is from, hey, yeah, then you yeah, then I am triggered. Okay, how can I create something that I like, but also
Yeah.
maybe people around me like? That's also like achievable for me to create, right? Because I'm not like an expert creative coder,
Hmm.
yeah, even though I'm doing this for a while, but I don't do it that often to really become very proficient at it. So I'm also looking for how can I make it fun for myself to like maybe code like for maybe 2 hours, but then have a nice visually pleasing result. So yeah, and that really can vary sometimes. So sometimes they refer to an artist from, hey, make something in the style of this person. So then I
Yeah.
dive into Wikipedia and read something about them and look at their artworks. But sometimes the prompt is spheres. So you just have to make something with a sphere shape, and the only thing you can use are spheres.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's sometimes like having like boundaries can actually make you also more creative. And so that
Sure.
also works
Yeah.
very well with pixel art, because I started with pixel art using a very limited tool called Pico 8, and you only have like 16 available colors, and only 128 by 128 pixels is your screen size. So you're really limited in the number of colors you can use and the number of pixels you can use. But actually having these restrictions actually, yeah, allows you to also, yeah, be more creative with the things you draw, and how things work in like a small retro game that I sometimes create.
Uh,
So yeah, the restrictions are actually sort of liberating,
yeah.
which
No,
sounds weird.
no. I mean, I
But,
think when you think about art in general, like it's about pushing the boundaries of what you think you're capable of. I think that if you talk to anybody who does art, like people who
mhm.
just do the same thing over and over and over again without growing, like I don't think that there's a lot of artists out there that enjoy doing that. That's why I'm always
Yeah.
fascinated by like musicians who will like go out on tour and they'll just play like the songs they wrote 40 years ago with like no new songs. It's like I imagine that you get some enjoyment out of that, but I'd imagine you get even more enjoyment out of creating new things. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Indeed. Yeah.
yeah, and this is like, I mean, honestly, like it's fascinating. Like you go to like there'll be a link in the show notes to like Mark's website. And, like there's games that you can play and different pixel art that he's built and things like that. It's pretty fascinating. And you mentioned, since you mentioned it, like the generative AI thing, right? We're getting to this world where in the near distant future, like we're recording this like in June of 2024, like there will be a time where somebody can go to any website, they just type in what they want, they get a picture, they get a video, they get a song. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
what is your general thoughts about this, right? Like obviously there's a lot of uh-oh to it, but also like it kind of
Yeah.
opens
Yeah.
like this box of just unlimited potential for things.
Yeah, I definitely have like mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I think it's nice if you can provide people with a tool or a different way to also become creative.
Hmm.
I think that's good, right? Because yeah, many people can now create like stunning visuals. What I don't like about especially the generative AI stuff is that of course a lot of the data was not really obtained in an ethical way.
Yeah,
So that's what I really dislike about it. But yeah, if data was obtained in an ethical way, then definitely would be okay with it. But yeah, so that the tools that artists use also change over time, right? So I definitely understand why people use it, and yeah, it's also not going away. I do understand that. For me, I personally don't use the generative AI part that much. So the part that I'm using though is definitely when I still write code to
yeah,
generate
yeah, yeah.
the art, but then I still sometimes use like Copilot, right?
Hmm.
So I'm also using other people's code,
Yeah,
or at least some data from someone else to also generate code that I'm using. Yeah, yeah, I'm also benefited from it. Um, so yeah, and it's really like a mixed feeling. It's nice that it can really help you, but I think it's also nice if you put some effort in yourself.
yeah,
And yeah, but what I like about especially about the coding part is yeah, you still have a lot of flexibility. You still have a lot of things that you can tweak and change. And yeah, if I would write a prompt and it would generate already the output for me, yeah, I think that the whole process would not be so satisfying as it is now, to be
sure.
honest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like of a similar way. Like I think you take a lot of the endorphin out of the doing the thing. You take out like all the positivity that you get from like you maybe you have to write like a really complex block of code, right? And like you feel satisfied after being able to do that. If you put in
Yeah.
a comment and the prompt is perfect and it gives you that block of code, sure,
Yeah.
that's great. But more than likely, it's not going to be exactly what you want. So you'll need to kind of do some
Yeah.
fine tuning
Yeah.
or whatever. Right? I feel the same way about like the artistic things that generative AI is doing, right? Um, Look, don't get me wrong. I've seen some like some very amazing art and photorealistic art and all these crazy things with generative AI. But there's always something like that just seems a bit off. Like people talk about like that uncanny valley where it's like you look at
Yeah,
it and
yeah,
you're
exactly.
like
Yeah,
you can just
yeah,
tell by looking at something that it's not real. Like
yeah,
I joke
yeah,
about the Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers. Like there's a scene where they're climbing up ladders to siege, and like there's this one like segment that like the CGI isn't very good, and whenever
yeah.
I
Ah,
see
okay.
it, like I just point and I just laugh because it is obviously like they tried to do something that just immediately triggers my brain. It's like that is not even close to real looking. And
Oh,
sure, like all of the
okay.
Lord of the
Yeah,
Rings is CGI, don't get me wrong, but this particular like
yeah,
part
yeah.
of it, I'm like this is so
Really
fake
stands
look.
out.
It's so fake looking to me. Like I just completely get taken out of the movie. But that's
Yeah.
anyway. Like I agree with your
Okay.
thoughts about like especially creating something with like artistic expression. Like sure, having OpenAI create me a picture of something if I need something quick, sure, that's valuable. But like if I want to like to have pride in something that I built myself, like why would I have an AI do it and then take credit for it when really like there's no credit to be given other than I guess the billions of data points that AI used to create that piece of art.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's a very, yeah, it's definitely like a gray area indeed. To be honest, I'm sure people, some people are probably like very good at what they call like prompt engineering. Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's also
Yes.
definitely a skill, right? So I do recognize that. But yeah, for me personally, I really like, yeah, like to write code and also tinker with code, and the
Mm-hmm.
same goes with drawing. Yeah, all the pixel art I just draw by a hand in the tool. I would yeah feel less happy if it was like just
Sure.
generated for me, because
Sure.
I just like the process. And when it comes to creative coding, actually, there are also uh, a lot of nice mistakes that you can make there. So there's definitely something like the happy little accidents, right? Just
Yeah.
as with
Yeah. Yeah.
with the Bob Ross paintings, and that can help. Both with, yeah, with Copilot, because maybe the Copilot stuff gives you maybe something slightly off, but maybe it's something like that's very visually pleasing still. Also, maybe, or maybe you're creating a small mistake yourself by maybe the plus needs to be a minus, but it can give you like a completely different visual than you had in mind, but it can still be like very satisfying. So it's also sometimes the imperfections, yeah, can actually result in something very, very positive, or something very, yeah, aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
So, and you would miss that, I think, if the AI completely takes care of the whole process, because yeah, there will be no like happy little accidents, I think, there.
This is a good point too. Like there's again, I think that there's just something that's just a bit too, I guess, perfect about a lot of generative stuff. Period. Like the attempt is to be perfect, but like
Hmm,
life is
hmm.
not perfect. So like you said, the happy accidents. I love
Yeah,
that
yeah,
analogy because yeah, like sometimes the best things have ever been done, like have been done on accident, right? And I think that's a good way to go about thinking about things in general, especially like with this AI stuff, because it's again, there's all sorts of confusion, there's all sorts of weird takes, and I think just understanding that it's like doing it yourself, there's value in it too.
yeah,
This
yeah.
conversation has been great. I mean, Mark, it's been great to know you, get to know you a bit more, learn about kind of your upbringing, your history, what interests you about tech, the cool stuff that you're working on. Like it's always good to, you talk to people at conferences and it's like you don't really know them, but you're able to talk to them about random stuff, and it's been great to get to know you a bit more over the course of the last hour. We've chatted about a bunch of stuff, right? And I'd love to kind of get your, looking back at this last, hour of conversation, like if
Mhm.
you could summarize it in a few words, like the thing, the thought that the feeling that you get kind of going over your history in tech, the things that you find
Mhm,
interesting,
mhm.
like how would you summarize the way that you feel?
Ooh, the way that I feel. Oh, that's a deep one. Well, I definitely feel like curiosity was always
Yeah.
like a very big aspect, right? So that already started very young, and it's still very much there. And I think I hope it will always be a part of my life, because yeah, being curious always is like a nice boost to dive into something that you have absolutely no idea about how it works. So you learn something new. You might want to
Mm-hmm.
try something. So yeah, I like curiosity and like doing some
Yep.
experiments. Also, yeah, not be afraid to fail, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that I only realized later, and it's perfectly fine, and not it's actually quite normal to not be successful right away, right? Because you have to learn stuff. So you cannot be perfect or very good right
Sure.
from the start.
Yeah.
So yeah, just accept that you have to learn and grow, and make some missteps, and hopefully learn about those, and then improve.
Yeah, I think one thing about that I love about the idea of being curious is that you'll never really bored, right?
Definitely,
Like
definitely.
and
Yeah,
as somebody
yeah.
who I get bored very easily, so I think that the need to be curious is almost like a vital asset of my personality,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, this conversation has been great, Mark. Like, so for folks that want to find Mark all over the internet, I think that he's done a very good job of capturing his name in the same place everywhere. The easiest place probably is on Twitter. You can find him at Mark Duiker. It's Marcduiker. There'll also be some links to show notes to other places that you can find. Also, there'll be a link to some of the cool artwork that he's done, the generative coding stuff, pixel art, and there'll be some links to some of the stuff that he's doing at Diagrid as well. So this has been great, Marc. I really appreciate your time. Before we sign off, do you have any parting words?
I think most of it I've just said already. Yeah, just also try to be curious, try to be open, and as always, the communication is always the most important thing that we can do, right? So it's never really about the technology. That's always the
Sure.
least important part. But it's always try to be open and try to be communicative, and that's the most important part. Yeah.
I can't agree more. And again, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and thank you for the folks tuning in right now and the folks that are listening in the future. So my name is Isaac Levin. You can find me on Twitter at IsaacR Levin. And I hope you enjoyed Coffee and Open Source. For my friend Marc, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and take care.